TF2's classes are some of the most iconic characters in video game history. Whether it's through TF2 itself, extraneous media like the comics, or fan creations like Emesis Blue, each one of these 9 classes has been gradually given a solid, concrete identity, allowing players to both understand and identify with them. But it wasn't always this way. When TF2 was initially released, the fully realized versions of the classes we have today hadn't been put together yet. Instead, Valve just had the foundations for an excellent cast of characters, but not the background or lore that we now have to paint the full picture of who these mercs are. For many at the time, they were mysterious, enigmatic, and unknown. And no class better exemplifies that sense of mystery than the Pyro. As TF2 would get updated, the characters would become more and more fleshed out, getting voice lines and animations that further helped fans understand who these characters were. All that is, except Pyro. For the longest time, nothing about this mercenary could be figured out. They spoke only in muffled screams, and didn't have any concrete history, making it hard to pin anything down about them. This left an infinite amount of questions. All questions that fans hoped would be answered through the release of their Meet the Team short. These short animations were the backbone for establishing a class's character traits and history, and there was a point where every single class had received one, except the Pyro. But if they wanted info, Valve was going to make them work for it, locking much of Pyro's identity behind a maze of codes and puzzles that fans would have to solve if they wanted to learn more about the most mysterious class in the game. And unfortunately, many would be disappointed by what they would find at the end of their journey. This is the story of Pyromania, the most controversial ARG in the history of Team Fortress 2. As far back as 2010, TF2 developer Robin Walker was already teasing the release of Meet the Pyro, saying in an interview with Critscast that it would allow you to, quote, see the world through Pyro's eyes. The date of this interview might have indicated to people at the time that the short film's release was just around the corner, but this would be far from true. Unbeknownst to TF2 players at that point, Meet the Pyro would end up being the final Meet the Team short to be released in the lineup, coming out multiple years after this interview would take place. This was the first ever mention of the mysterious Meet the Pyro short, and confirms that the TF2 team had the general idea for what the film would be like years in advance. Of course, this didn't stop the general community from engaging in outlandish speculation, imagining up various scenarios that could play out in a hypothetical Meet the Pyro.
What I expect, very little. I imagine that at the very most, the Pyro's mumbling speech will be subtitled, but we'll never actually see the Pyro unmasked or learn what the Pyro's gender is. What I wish, Pyro is revealed to be a Mexican woman, and official female skins will be added for each class in the same update.
Many of these brilliant ideas were put out onto the Steam-powered user forums, or SPUF for short. These forums would be something of a hub for players to use to discuss Team Fortress 2, much like the TF2 Reddit is today. It was here that the foundation would be laid for groups to solve Valve's various TF2 puzzles and ARGs. These forums were also a good way to judge the general feelings of the TF2 community in its early days. As more and more updates rolled out for the game between 2010 and 2011, a growing sentiment would form among TF2 players at this time that Pyro needed to be majorly changed in some way.
The Pyro's role is currently undefined, closest to being a pure support class, remotely still resembling a defense class, but nowhere near an offense class.
Players just weren't happy with them in their current state, and it was suspected that the class would have to be updated in some major way in the near future. A Pyro update that would give the class some much-needed polish. At some point during this period, many players would begin to make the assumption that the unreleased Meet the Pyro short would be released alongside this hypothetical Pyro update.
Now we know that Meet the Pyro is coming out this year. What if there was also a class update for the Pyro with it? What sort of things would you want to see? I think the best and simplest thing to do is to give the Pyro the ability to air blast jump.
Another thing that was extremely prevalent amidst Pyro discussion at this time was, of course, debates about the character's gender. This was the prime TF2 discourse at the time, so much so that Game Theory's MatPat made a whole video breaking down the debate in excruciating detail.
Studies have shown women are more attracted to men whose leg height matches their torso height, and for the Pyro, his legs are the length of 3 Pyro heads, as is his torso. So under that mask could be a very beautiful man.
Valve themselves would even join in on the fun, adding a plethora of references to Pyro's gender that contradicted each other. further confusing the TF2 player base and causing dozens of threads about the Pyro's gender to pop up all over the Spuff forums.
Why the Pyro is a woman? Because TF2 equals Sausage Fest, and the announcer doesn't count because she's old and wrinkly. What? What does that have to do with Pyro being a woman?
Players were expecting this upcoming Pyro update to give some sort of confirmation about the character's gender, with some going as far as to speculate that the Meet the Pyro short would be focused around this reveal in some way. This was something that mattered to a lot of players, especially at the time. Some felt that knowing Pyro's gender would solidify their character a little more, while others felt that they could better identify with them if it were confirmed. Most, of course, were just morbidly curious. All of this speculation and hype from the TF2 community gradually raised the stakes for this imaginary update that people assumed would eventually come. With more and more community pressure being put on Valve to ensure that this was something truly special, how could Valve manage to capitalize on this hype and match people's expectations? They needed to find something that was unprecedented, to engage the fanbase and make them feel like this long-awaited update was truly something special. For the first time in any major capacity, the TF2 team began a complete, full-on ARG.
So the next thing I want to talk about is the Pyro meet the dust lint goldfish wood plank thing that's going on in the latest update in Team Fortress. I don't know what the hell is going on.
On June 19th, 2012, the Pyromania ARG launched, in the form of a silent update applied to TF2 with no patch notes. This update added a set of 7 cosmetics to the drop system, which would start rolling out to active users playing the game. Obviously, this was cause for suspicion. Why would Valve start adding items without telling the community? Suspecting that something big was coming soon, a group of devoted Valve fans and TF2 players would come together in an attempt to dismantle the ARG they suspected was coming. This group was known as the Valve ARG Network. They were an organization of sleuths and code breakers who devoted their time to trying to crack the codes Valve hid in their various titles. First created on April 8th, 2011, it was this group that was largely responsible for solving nearly every puzzle Valve put in front of them. And they weren't just a group of casual players who did this for fun. They took this job very seriously, going as far as to keep track of which users were close geographically to different studios, so the network could visit them in person if that were necessary to solve a puzzle. This was a group of insanely dedicated savants, and when these items were added, this group set their sights on Team Fortress 2 for the very first time. It was quickly discovered that one of the items, the damage capacitor, contained a couple of secret codes on its sides. The first one read gray, while the second one contained the date of June 22nd. I covered both of these codes extensively in my MVM ARG breakdown, so go watch that if you want more info. But this essentially confirmed that something would happen on June 22nd. The following day, on June 20th, another silent patch was released for TF2. This added a small change that gave these 7 items a unique use case. It was discovered that, if a player equipped the Eliminating the Impossible item set, the descriptions of these items would each change. Each description was a small string of words. When these words were all placed together, it spelled out a quote from the Sherlock Holmes book, The Adventure of the Copper Beeches.
Think of the deeds of hellish cruelty, the hidden wickedness which may go on, year in, year out, in such places, and none the wiser.
Though it's never been explicitly stated anywhere, it is my personal belief that this quote was used to refer to the psychology of the Pyro himself. As players would come to learn in just a few days, the class's psyche is not one of a murderous psychopath, but of someone who genuinely thinks they're making the world better through the horrific slaughter they partake in every day. These deeds of hellish cruelty have a hidden wickedness buried deep within the Pyro's mind. The following day, TF2 would receive yet another silent update. Despite not being told what this update contained, players and members of the Valve ARG network quickly learned that you could now craft 2 banana peels together. Doing so would give you a fake error message. This message contained 3 languages, Spanish in the body of the message, Finnish below that, and Welsh replacing the dismiss button. These language changes, though funny, aren't important. What is, however, is the number code. This code contained a set of hexadecimal sequences, which would differ in their order randomly depending on the player who accessed them. Additionally, the game's item schema would be updated. The item schema is essentially a block of in-game data that determines every characteristic a TF2 item should have. The part of this data referencing the aforementioned eliminating the impossible item set, specifically its quote, mystery solving time attribute, would be changed, now featuring a set of 8 MD5 hash strings. These strings, much like in the MVM ARG, could be used as a way to check if the solutions to the puzzle were correct or not. Upon this update dropping, the Valve ARG network would immediately get to work. Spuff user and Valve ARG network affiliate, Marshazzle, would make a post on the TF2 Spuff forum titled 2012 Summer ARG Summary. This forum post would act as a hub for all of the activity around the ARG during its run, and allow for the network to gather even more info from Spuff members to help them figure out the ARG.
I love you right now. Keep this updated and on the front page, huh? ARGs sure do have a knack for making me feel like a moron.
Simultaneously, the network updated their wiki to add a Team Fortress 2 section, as this was the first time TF2 had done a major ARG, and allocated one of their IRC chat rooms to picking everything apart. I'm sure that they were filled with excitement, theories, and speculation about the future of the game. It was a time of discovery, and the TF2 community was much more interconnected than it is today. And they were about to band together to accomplish something truly special. A Steam group was also created, and worked closely with the network and the Spuff forums in the solving of this ARG. Minutes after the initial update that added the banana peel crafting, a user in this Steam group by the name of Ned Ballard was the first to create a thread of all 8 banana codes, which were then taken by the network and decoded. Once the hexadecimal strings attached to each error were decoded, these strings could be attached to a URL on the official TF2 website, showing an image of a QR code. Network members XPaw and XKeeper both hosted websites that showed all 8 codes, allowing them to be confirmed as genuine by comparing them to the MD5 checksums I mentioned earlier. Each QR code then led to an image. When all 8 images were collected, they formed a transcript, which Spuff users quickly jumped on.
It appears to be a transcript of a Senate hearing regarding the Poopy Joe Manco incident. I'll post a composite momentarily.
The Poopy Joe incident is an often forgotten piece of TF2 lore, where a rocket containing a monkey astronaut named Poopy Joe crashed as a result of its Australian fuel being stolen and replaced with gravel water. Unlike the Grey Man reveal that occurred in the MVM ARG, this event is much more of a blip in the massive TF2 timeline, meant to demonstrate the corruption that Manco has within its walls. Ultimately, the whole thing is really just a teaser for the upcoming Doomsday map that would be added in the Pyromania update, which had the mercenaries deliver Australium to the rocket Poopy Joe was in, only to watch it explode at the end of the match anyways. If you were a TF2 player watching all of this unfold, a question you likely had was, what does any of this have to do with the Pyro? Poopy Joe was a character people hadn't heard of since the War update, which was released nearly 3 years prior to this ARG. So what was the significance of any of this? And why was it related to an ARG that supposedly was about the Pyro? This question caused Spuff users to go on a number of schizophrenic tangents.
If that image is true, then the Pyro might just be a space monkey, evolved from Australium and cosmic rays. That's interesting. Damage capacitor is what caused Poopy Joe's rocket to explode. Pyro is a monkey named Poopy Joe.
The lack of a concrete connection between Pyro and Poopy Joe caused immense speculation, which flooded the Spuff thread as more and more information kept coming out. At nearly midnight, the TF2 blog updated with a post containing a Steam Workshop tutorial, titled, How a Gun Gets Made. Though the video associated with this tutorial is now private, the blog post that's replaced the video on the official TF2 channel has cataloged many images from the original video, revealing that the weapon constructed in this how-to video would later become part of the Pyromania update, the now infamous Scorch Shot. We'll talk more about it later, so just keep that in the back of your head. Finally, on June 22nd, the date forecasted by the damage capacitor, TF2's blog updated with this message from the Pyro, which could be converted into Morse code using the long umps as dashes and the short umps as dots. Once translated, it became the word Monday. And subsequently, on Monday, June 25th, the Pyromania update would be announced, alongside a countdown for the upcoming Meet the Pyro short. At long last, it was finally here. The Pyro update everyone wanted was on the horizon. Everyone was excited. The TF2 wiki even changed their homepage to look like the pyro had completely taken over and burned everything. It was the perfect storm of hype and masterful game work by the TF2 team. The whole community, for the first time in the game's history, had truly banded together and beaten a challenge Valve had given them. Now the fruits of their labors were just on the horizon. Would Pyro's gender finally be revealed? Their backstory? What were these new weapons going to be like? For these answers, players just had to wait a few more days. The first day of Pyromania contained the release of Doomsday, where TF2 players could play out the aforementioned Poopy Joe story in real time. Clicking on a banana peel at the bottom of the update page revealed a series of documents that gave players even more info and context about the incident. Days 2 and 3 revealed a whopping 16 new cosmetics, 5 new non-pyro weapons, the Pyroland weapons, and most infamously, the Scorch Shot. However, what may surprise you if you're a newer TF2 player is that the Scorch Shot was actually loved by TF2 players at the time of its launch. It wasn't the universally maligned weapon that it is today. In fact, many considered it a well-balanced side grade to the flare gun. It wasn't until July 2015 where it would be massively buffed into the absurdly poor design that we have it as today. No, the weapons that were the most controversial were actually the Pyroland weapons, believe it or not. Many were completely disappointed and offended that Valve's big Pyro update featured just one new weapon for the Pyro, with the remaining weapons being stock reskins that, to many disgruntled players, just made the game look worse. There was a single other major Pyro change that people did appreciate, that being the 10% damage increase to the stock flamethrower. Other than that though, that was really it as far as Pyro was concerned. Many were massively disappointed by this outcome. After years of speculation and discourse about what the Pyro needed from a gameplay perspective, the actual changes ultimately amounted to a new flare gun and a stock flamethrower buff, and a bunch of filler. Or at least that's the perspective a lot of people held toward this release at the time. Not to mention the massive server problems that Valve experienced upon the update's launch. Many people just straight up couldn't play the game at all, or couldn't access their items because the item servers were down. To many players, this update seemed quite haphazard and short-sighted, especially after all of the work the community put into working on the ARG that led up to this update. To be clear, this wasn't the opinion of the community as a whole. Many were satisfied with the update's content and enjoyed what there was to play, especially with weapons like the Babyface's Blaster and the Beggar's Bazooka being added. For players who didn't really play Pyro or care all that much about them, this was a great update, but for players looking for a major Pyro overhaul that fixed a lot of their inherent issues, this was just not enough.
2 out of 10, everything was a big disappointment.
But what about the highly anticipated release of Meet the Pyro? Surely that would make up for much of what's happened with the in-game part of the update, right? Well, not exactly. Meet the Pyro is a short that fundamentally changed the way people looked at the Pyro for years to come, shifting the focus of their character from being a murderous psychopath to that of a whimsical schizophrenic who's secretly a complete softie. For many, this change in their character made them more dynamic, giving a dimension to the Pyro that they didn't have before. But for many other TF2 fans, this short absolutely obliterated the character, taking them far, far away from anything they had once been before.
What I saw the Pyro as since first starting TF2 was a monster. Someone who not only reveled in killing, like the other mercs, but also took a much more sadistic pleasure in it. The Pyro seemed to live in the moment, and was a deeply insane oddball. But after the Pyro video, he just seems like a kid.
Unlike other disappointments that people had with the Pyromania update at the time, this is a sentiment that persisted. People who loved the Pyro's unapologetic, sadistic nature now felt as if the TF2 team had completely removed that aspect of the character, dumbing down what they loved so much about the Pyro. Even today, as the character leaned more and more into their cutesy, bubbly side, players, especially old ones, still feel actively opposed to what they see as character assassination. It's a lasting impact that people are still reckoning with today.
His Meet the Team short poisoned his character so much because many just focused on the cutesy stuff. He equates rainbows and sunshine with murder by fire and dismemberment. He isn't a teddy bear, he's a murderous schizophrenic.
On top of that, not a single mention, hint, or glance toward the character's gender was found in the short, which only added to the growing feeling of disappointment among certain fans. After this point, Valve wouldn't even really mention or poke fun at the gender debate in any major capacity. It would forever be an unanswered question. Eventually, TF2 players would get what they wanted, a full-on overhaul of the Pyro, bottom up, voted for by the fans years after the Pyromania update released, in the form of 2017's Jungle Inferno. This update fixed a lot of the bugs and issues that plagued the Pyro since their release. But for many players, the damage was already done. Before Meet Your Match was released, Pyromania was arguably the most controversial update in the game's history, and its impact is still felt today. Many players don't know the Pyro as anything other than what the Pyromania update made them out to be, a goofball who just so happens to murder people indiscriminately. Some are perfectly fine with this, and are content with the change, while others are still bitter about it. Yet all the controversy that came from this update was initially the result of the efforts of the TF2 community to solve a puzzle laid out before them by the powers that be. The efforts of groups like the Valve ARG Network and the Summer ARG Steam group have been largely forgotten today. Personally, I think it's important to highlight the history and thought that's gone into the things we interact with all the time, not just in TF2, but everywhere. I've loved making these ARG videos because they allow me to give a greater understanding on something many people have never thought of or heard of. It brings me joy knowing that I can bring to light the work of these lesser-known legends in the TF2 community, and I'll continue doing it as long as there's a story to tell. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.